Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the What Life. We are crit racing this evening. This is actually race 3 for the sprint series. We were a little bit interrupted by the epic race on the weekend. So this is a crit race, 5 loops of the Glasgow UCI crit circuit. I'll give you some more info on that in a second. First and foremost, let's get underway. This was always going to be a hot start. Crit races tend to be a hot start. There's also the champion sprint. I'm not actually sure that actually has any relevance on this race, but the champion sprint is basically right in front of us when we come out the pens, and people like to just hammer away and dive straight into that. So Glasgow crit circuit is always a fast start. If you know, you know. So this is a bit of a tutorial on kind of what is crit racing, how it works, and the kind of little nuances to it, and perhaps a bit of a deeper dive in the way that you can actually train for crit racing. And I'll kind of pick a few points that I want to talk about, but I am going to say that my current training is not really conducive to crit racing. So this was super hard. I absolutely loved it. Let's dive back into the stats for the race. Glasgow crit circuit. It's 5 loops. Total distance is 15.3 kilometers, 166 meters of elevation. You got the Clyde kicker, which is a double step up, and then you got a few little rolling punches. Now, the nice thing about this course is the fact that no effort on this course is ever going to be longer than maybe 15-20 seconds. Even the Clyde kicker, it's a 5-10 second kick into a 10-15 second kick. All the other punches are just small little 10, 15, 20 second efforts, but all quite anaerobic. So keep an eye on the watt chart down the very bottom, the power chart, and you're going to see those little red spikes. The problem with this race this evening was that there were 250 riders taking part. And guys, I do apologize. I think Zwift had a big update today, and I think that because there's a bunch of people on one network and a bunch of people on another network, it actually made it quite laggy for me, I think. If people race in different versions, I think that's when Zwift really starts to struggle, and I definitely realized that tonight. So if there's a bit of a lag, I do apologize. So the aim of this game is to try and roll with the front group. And here's the interesting thing, guys. How many people do you reckon it would take for there to be one continuous snake of people around a Zwift circuit? Like, if we got 2,000 riders in this, do you think that you'd effectively be in the draft the entire time because we'd be able to connect the front of one group to the back of the other? I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, but this was the problem with this race, is that nothing was ever going to be able to snap the rubber band and get any separation between one group and another. Obviously, if you know the Glasgow crit circuit, like I said, there's a couple of little rollers in there, 15-20 second efforts, but outside of that, there's nothing that's really going to break the race up. So even though there were 250 riders, it felt like there was about 110 to 120 in our front group at any one time, so which is a lot of riders, and it did make it hard for like a race within the race to develop. It was just quite simply everyone keep cycling, everyone move forward, and then we're going to go for a bunch sprint, but the bunch sprint is going to be between 50 to 60 people, which is madness, but fun nonetheless. So as I was saying, that from a crit perspective, my training does not lean too well for that. You've got this Clyde kicker here. You can see it punch down here. I actually got fire socks the other week. It's the only thing I'm ever going to use from now on. And this is the Clyde kicker, double punch, couple of seconds here, and then maybe 15 seconds to do the top half. I would like to see everyone. How good would the crit race be if everyone had fire socks? I think that should be like a kind of unanimous rule for crit racing, is that it's just unanimously everyone is provided with a set of fire socks so that we can see when people are kicking. Like, I think that just makes it more interesting than this kind of like, I imagine some people don't use fire socks for the express purpose of trying to avoid the notoriety of someone seeing them putting the watts down on a race like this on a crit circuit, when in actual fact the reality is everyone should be given, every bike should be made fire socked expressly so that we can just watch everyone and keep an eye on everyone. Like, I think that makes it better. If anything, everyone should have it. But there were a few points when this race kind of cooled down a little bit, and sorry, I am digressing. My training, I'm doing a lot of volume work. I'm kind of teaming that up with obviously the Zwift Games, which is knocking my socks off. I did the Zwift Epic yesterday, which completely knocked my socks off. That was a Sunday 2-hour effort, and I did really find that hard. I think the volume of training that I'm doing, but I'm also 41 years old, so I'm not really doing that level of anaerobic, hard, intense 20-second efforts, 30-second efforts, minute, 60-second efforts that is probably conducive to this style of crit racing or crit style racing. Obviously, a normal crit would probably last, an IRL crit would last anything from like an hour and a half. But this race is over in 20 minutes. So that kind of tells you that, if you are a very strong rider and you've got a good punch on you, then, that's the game for you. This kind of race is a young person's kind of ride. I've actually teamed up with a coach, and I will do more of a talk on coaching and the benefits of coaching. But I'm not going to dive into that too much right now, other than to say that, I'm constantly chatting to him about, what's best for what I'm trying to do. Whilst coupling this up with my running, it has made a race like this, it makes it really hard. So I'm actually very happy just to be able to ride with this group. And I feel like I'm still making progress at the periods where I'm struggling. And this is actually a key, very important point. I did a documentary last year with a guy called Stephen Scullion, who's a 2:08 marathon runner, US marathon runner, very, very good marathon runner. And he said one thing that stuck with me henceforth, which was you should always, after every week or every 2 weeks, be able to look at your training and identify points where you progress. You should every week or two be making improvements. He said, this concept where we go away and we train really hard and we put ourselves in a hole for 3-4 weeks and we progressively get worse and more tired and more fatigued, and then at the end of those 4 weeks we think that we take a week off to recover and we come back stronger. That's not how it works. You should always be weekly and bi-weekly looking for small improvements in certain areas. And that's a very key message, guys. If you are kind of hammering yourself with training and you're just putting the volume in and putting the intensity in, but your numbers are not necessarily progressively getting better. I'm not saying every number needs to improve every time. There are going to be times when, for this race, for me, was more of an indicator that perhaps I need to take some time away from trying to do these hard, shorter races, because my body is not up for that at the time. I feel like I still handled it reasonably well, but it certainly wasn't a PB. It wasn't kind of necessarily too close to a PB, and it definitely doesn't necessarily look like progress, which is a little bit worrying. So that's kind of a big takeaway from crit racing or crit training, or effectively, these hard, shorter interval sessions, which effectively is what this 5 loops of the UCI Glasgow crit circuit was. Let's chat some numbers before we get to the end of the race and I run out of time, because this is a very short race, only being 20 minutes, and I've sped it forward. I hold 301 watts for the race, which is, I think, just 3.9 watts per kg. I'm not too far off that 4 watts per kg. I struggled a little bit. My 20 minutes was 4 watts per kg, and I think there was a little bit in between that kind of just ducked it below. My normalized is 311, which is 4 watts per kg. So I'm happy with it considering the level of fatigue. Doing the Epic yesterday was super hard. There's the fact that there were so many people in this race, it didn't necessarily make it for a race where there was nuances to it, where things were happening. I noticed that a few guys had ridden off the front, but you're always just aware that the whole group is going to move forward and catch them. So yeah, the other interesting thing that I did notice about the race was the fact that obviously 5 loops. The first one was our fastest, and my last lap was my second fastest. Other than that, there's nothing too kind of surprising, although my last lap was actually the one where I put in the highest amounts of watts, 320 watts for my last lap, and I'm presuming that's because of the little kick towards the end when we go for the finish line. We are not altogether too far off the final, and Lee, thanks very much for the kind of private message. Very few messages during this crit race. I think it's because, a lot of it is up out the saddle, and that's the other thing. If you are going to train for these things, you're going to put in those short little really anaerobic sessions, those little anaerobic sprints, then you want to kind of get used to basically producing a ton of lactic. You want your body to two things. The first thing is you want your body to get used to handling lactate. So being able to have a high lactic tolerance, and then you also want your body to get used to being able to clear lactic. And that is basically what is kind of repeatability. Lactic has a bunch of different functions, one of which is a neurological indicator to your muscles to stop working or work less. But it also, lactic is effectively acts as an energy source, as a way for your body to produce more energy. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword in that respect. It gives you a chance, your body, to keep functioning, but at the same time, it also tells your body to chill the hell out. And that's basically where I was. So doing the double clicker for the last time, I was just head down for those little sessions, just kind of focus on, like, not even looking at the screen, just head down on the little kicks. Same again for this little kicker that comes up next. Just head down, out the saddle, 10-15 seconds. I'm not sure how many, you kind of like sound it out in your head, or like work it out in your head. You're like, oh, just kind of head down, put your little kick in, and then look back up, and you're like, oh, I'm at the top, cool, nice. The key thing was to make sure I was still like within touching distance of the front of this group. There was a ton of people. I knew that, given just how much I've been doing and the struggles that I've been going through, like just trying to keep my training like in terms of volume, because that is what I'm focusing on, that I definitely was not going to have the legs holding, a relatively high watts for me to be able to sprint at the end of this. But I thought, nonetheless, I'm going to give it like a reasonable crack. Knowing that there's so many people in this front group, and that I am, marginally towards the front. I think within the first 50, I think it's great out of a 250 person race. And the nice thing about the UCI Glasgow crit circuit is you get that little kicker up, and then it's go time. You just basically know that you've got to go. Some people will go straight off that little kicker, that little incline. And then you just got to do everything. There's almost like no point just looking at the screen whatsoever. You basically just have to work. For me, it was like a double work. Like I was like putting some power on, realizing that I'm absolutely balls, and then coming off a bit, and then trying to put more on. So I'm super happy with that finish, guys. I think that did pretty well. I try and take a kind of look, 20 minute 4 watts per kg, 5 minutes 4.3. So all very reasonable, and I am actually really happy with it. And we do have a quick look at my power curve to see whether I hit a 20-minute PB, which I don't quite do, but I think if I have a bit of time off, I can come back stronger and really work on that anaerobic ability. Guys, thanks a lot.